Hello, welcome back to another Monday story time. Today I'm going to be carrying on reading The Last Wish for you all. I hope you're all having a great day. So let's get started. We are on A Question of Price, Chapter 1. The Witcher had a knife at his throat. He was wallowing in a wooden tub, brimful of soap suds, his head thrown back against its slippery rim. The bitter taste of soap lingered in his mouth as the knife, blunt as a doorknob, scraped his Adam's apple painfully and moved towards his chin with a grating sound. The barber, with the expression of an artist who is conscious that he is creating a masterpiece, scraped once more, for form's sake, then wiped the witcher's face with a piece of linen soaked in tincture of angelica. Geralt stood up, allowed a servant to pour a bucket of water over him, shook himself, and climbed from the tub, leaving wet footmarks on the brick floor. Your towel, sir. The servant glanced curiously at his medallion. Thanks. Clothes, said Haxo. Shirt, underpants, trousers, and tunic. And boots. You've thought of everything. But can't I go in my own shoes? No. Beer? With pleasure. He dressed slowly. The touch of someone else's coarse, unpleasant clothes against his swollen skin spoilt his relaxed mood. Castellan. Yes, Geralt. You don't know what this is all about, do you? Why they need me here? It's not my business, said Haxo, squinting at the servants. My job is to get you dressed. Dressed up, you mean? Get you dressed and take you to the banquet, to the Queen. Put the tunic on, sir, and hide the medallion beneath it. My dagger was here. It isn't any more. It's in a safe place, like your swords and your possessions. Nobody carries arms where you're going. The Witcher shrugged, pulling on the tight purple tunic. And what's this? He asked, indicating the embroidery on the front of his outfit. Oh yes, said Haxo. I almost forgot. During the banquet, you will be the Honourable Ravix of Forhorn. As guest of honour, you will sit at the Queen's right hand, such is her wish, and that, on your tunic, is the coat of arms. A bear, passant sable, damsel vested azure riding him, her hair loose and arms raised. You should remember it. One of the guests might have a thing about heraldry. It often happens. Of course I'll remember it, said Geralt seriously. And Forhorn, where's that? Far enough. Ready? Can we go? We can. Just tell me, Haxo. What's this banquet in aid of? Princess Perfetta is turning 15, and as is the custom, contenders for her hand have turned up in their dozens. Queen Calante wants her to marry someone from Skellig. An alliance with the islanders would mean a lot to us. Why them? Those they're allied with aren't attacked as often as others. A good reason. And not the sole one. In Sintra, women can't rule. King Rowinger died some time ago, and the Queen doesn't want another husband. Our Lady Calanthe is wise and just, but a king is a king. Whoever marries the princess will sit on the throne, and we want a tough, decent fellow. They have to be found on the islands. They're a hard nation. Let's go. Geralt stopped halfway down the gallery, surrounding the small inner courtyard, and looked around. Castellan, he said under his breath, we're alone. Quickly, tell me why the Queen needs a witcher. You of all people must know something. For the same reasons as everyone else, Haxo grunted. Sintra is just like any other country. We've got werewolves, and basilisks, and a manticore could be found too, if you looked hard enough. So a witcher might also come in useful. Don't twist my words, Castellan. I'm asking why the Queen needs a witcher in disguise as a bear passant with hair loose at the banquet. Haxo also looked around, and even leant over the gallery balustrade. Something bad's happening, Geralt, he muttered. In the castle. Something's frightening people. What? What usually frightens people? A monster. They say it's small, hunchbacked, bristling like the urchin. It creeps around the castle at night, rattles chains, moans and groans in the chambers. Have you seen it? No, Haxo spat, and I don't want to. You're talking nonsense, Castellan, grimaced the Witcher. It doesn't make sense. We're going to an engagement feast. What am I supposed to do there? Wait for a hunchback to jump out and groan? Without a weapon, dressed up like a jester? Haxo? Think what you like, grumbled Castellan. They told me not to tell you anything, but you asked, so I told you. And you tell me I'm talking nonsense? How charming. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you, Castellan. I was simply surprised. Stop being surprised. Haxo turned away, still sulking. Your job isn't to be surprised. And I strongly advise you, Witcher, that if the Queen orders you to strip naked, paint your ass blue, and hang yourself upside down in the entrance hall like a chandelier, you do it without surprise or hesitation. Otherwise, you might meet with a fair amount of unpleasantness. Have you got that? I've got it. Let's go, Haxo. Whatever happens, that bath's given me an appetite. Chapter 2. Apart from the curt, ceremonious greetings which she welcomed him as Lord Forhorn, Queen Calanthe didn't exchange a single word with the Witcher. The banquet was about to begin, and the guests, loudly announced by the herald, were gathering. The table was huge, rectangular, and could seat more than 40 men. Calanthe sat at the head of the table on a throne with a high backrest. Geralt sat on her right, and on her left a grey-haired bard called Drogadar, with a lute. 2 more chairs at the head of the table on the Queen's left remained empty. To Geralt's right, along the table, sat Haxo and a voivode whose name he'd forgotten. Beyond them were the guests from Duchy of Tyre, the sullen and silent knight Rainfarn and his charge, the chubby 12-year-old Prince Windhelm, one of the pretenders to the prince's hand. Further down were the colourful and motley knights from Cintra, and local vassals. Baron Ilmonton of Tig, announced the herald. Cood Kadak, murmured Calanthe, nudging Drogadar. This will be fun. A thin and whiskered, richly attired knight bowed low, but his lively, happy eyes and cheerful smirk belied his subservience. Greetings, Cood Kadak, said the Queen ceremoniously. Obviously the Baron was better known by his nickname than by his family name. We are happy to see you. And I am happy to be invited, declared Kudikak, and sighed. Oh, well, I'll cast an eye on the princess, if you permit, my queen. It's hard to live alone, ma'am. Aye, Kudikak, Calanthe smiled faintly, wrapping a lock of her hair round her finger. But you are already married, as we all know. Ah, the Baron was miffed. You know yourself, ma'am, how weak and delicate my wife is, and smallpox is rife in the neighbourhood. I bet my belt and sword against a pair of old slippers that in a year I'll be already out of mourning. Poor man, Kudikak, but lucky too. Calanthe's smile grew wider. Lucky your wife isn't stronger. I hear that last harvest she caught you in the haystack with a strumpet. She chased you for almost a mile with a pitchfork, but couldn't catch you. You had better feed her, cuddle her more, and take care that her back doesn't get cold during the night. Then in a year, you'll see how much better she is. Kudikak pretended to grow doleful. I'll take your point, but can I stay for the feast? We'd be delighted, Baron. The legislation from Skellig, shouted the herald, becoming increasingly hoarse. The islanders, 4 of them, in shiny leather doublets trimmed with seal fur and belted with checkered woolen sashes, strode in with a sprightly hollow step. They were led by a sinewy warrior with a dark face and aquiline nose, and at his side a broad-shouldered youth with a mop of red hair. They all bowed before the Queen. It's a great honour, said Calanthe, a little flushed. to welcome such an excellent knight as Ice Turasik of Skellige to my castle again. If it weren't for your well-known disdain for marriage, I'd be delighted to think you were here to court my Pavetta. Has loneliness got the better of you after all, sir? Often enough, beautiful Calanthe, replied the dark-faced islander, raising his glistening eyes to the Queen. But my life is too dangerous for me to contemplate a lasting union. If it weren't for that, Pavetta is still a young girl, and an open bud, but I can see... See what? The apple does not fall far from the tree, smiled Ice Turasy, flashing his white teeth. Suffice it to look at you, my queen, to know how beautiful the princess will be when she reaches the age at which a woman can please a warrior. In the meantime, it's young men who ought to court her, such as our King Bran's nephew here, Crack-a-Crate, who travelled here for exactly that purpose. Crack, bowing his head, knelt on one knee before the Queen. Who else have you brought, Iced? A thick-set, robust man, with a bushy beard and strapping fellow with bagpipes on his back, knelt by Crack-a-Crate. This is the gallant druid Mousesack, who, like me, is a good friend and adviser to King Bran. And this is Drake von Dur, our famous skald, and 30 seamen from Skellige are waiting in the courtyard, burning with hope to catch a glimpse of the beautiful Calanthe of Cintra. Sit down, noble guests. Turasich, sir, sit here. Ice took the vacant seat at the narrower end of the table, only separated from the Queen by Drogadar and an empty chair. The remaining islanders sat together on the left, between Marshal Visigird and 3 sons of Lord Strept, Tingland, Fodcat, and Wieldhill. That's more or less everyone. The Queen leant over to the Marshal. Let's begin, Visigird. The Marshal clapped his hands. The servants, carrying platters and jugs, moved towards the table in a long line, greeted by a joyful murmur from the guests. Calanthe barely ate, reluctantly picking at the morsels served with her silver fork. Drogadar, having bolted his food, kept strumming his lute. The rest of the guests, on the other hand, laid waste to the roast piglets, bears, fish, mollusks on offer, with the red-haired Crack-a-Crate in lead. Rainfarn of Atra reprimanded the young Prince Wilmtam severely, even slapping his hand when he reached for a jug of cider. Kudkadak stopped, picking bones for a moment, and entertained his neighbours by imitating the whistle of a mud turtle. The atmosphere grew merrier by the minute. The first toasts were being raised and already becoming less and less coherent. Calanthe adjusted the narrow golden circlet on her curled ash-grey hair and turned to Geralt, who was busy cracking open a huge red lobster. It's loud enough that we can exchange a few words discreetly. Let us start with courtesies. I'm pleased to meet you. The pleasure's mutual, Your Majesty. After the courtesies come hard facts. I've got a job for you. So I gathered. I'm rarely invited to feast for the pleasure of my company. You're probably not very interesting company then. What else have you gathered? I'll tell you, when you've outlined my task, Your Majesty. Geralt, said Calanthe, her fingers tapping an emerald necklace, the smallest stone of which was the size of a bumblebee. What sort of task do you expect, as a witcher? What? Digging a well, repairing a hole in the roof, weaving a tapestry of all the positions King Verdank and the beautiful Sarah tried on their wedding night? Surely you know what your profession's about. Yes, I do. I'll tell you what I've gathered, Your Majesty. I'm curious. I gathered that, and that, like many others, you've mistaken my trade for an altogether different profession. Oh, Calanthe, casually leaning towards the lute-strumming Drogadar, gave the impression of being pensive and absent. Who, Geralt, makes up for this ignorant horde with whom you acquaint me? And for what profession do those fools mistake your trade? Your Majesty, said Geralt calmly, while I was riding to Cintra, I met villagers, merchants, peddlers. dwarves, tinkers, and woodcutters. They told me about a black anise who has its hide out somewhere in these woods, a little house on a chicken claw tripod. They mentioned a chimera, nestling in the mountains. Asnes and centiomorphs. Apparently a manticore could also be found if you look hard enough. So many tasks a witcher could perform without having to dress up in someone else's feathers and a coat of arms. You didn't answer my question. Your Majesty, I don't doubt that a marriage alliance with Skellige is necessary for Sintra. It's possible, too, that the schemers who want to prevent it deserve a lesson, using means which don't involve you. It's convenient if this lesson were to be given by an unknown lord from Forhorn, who would then disappear from the scene. And now I'll answer your question. You mistake my trade for that of a hired killer. Those others, of whom there are so many, are rulers. It's not the first time I've been called to court where the problems demand the quick solutions of a sword. But I've never killed people for money, regardless of whether it's for a good or bad cause, and I never will. The atmosphere at the table was growing more and more lively as the beer diminished. The red-haired Crack and Crate found an appreciative listeners to his tale of the Battle of Twith. Having sketched a map on the table with the help of meat and bones dipped in sauce, he marked out the strategic plan, shouting loudly. Kudakak, providing his apt nickname, was suddenly cackling like a very real sitting hen, creating general mirth among the guests and consternation among the servants, who were convinced that a bird, mocking their vigilance, had somehow managed to make its way from the courtyard into the hall. Thus, fate has punished me with too shrewd a witcher. Calanthe smiled, but her eyes were narrowed and angry. A witcher who, without a shadow of respect, or, at the very least, of common courtesy, exposes my intrigues and infamous plans, but hasn't a fascination with my beauty and charming personality clouded your judgment? Don't ever do that again, Geralt. Don't speak to those in power like that. Few of them would forget your words, and you know kings. They have all sorts of things at their disposal. Daggers, poisons, dungeons, red-hot pokers. There are hundreds, thousands of ways a king can avenge their wounded pride. And you wouldn't believe how easy it is, Geralt, to wound some rulers. Rarely will any of them take words such as no, I won't, and never calmly. But that's nothing. Interrupt one of them, or make inappropriate comments, and you'll condemn yourself to the wheel. The Queen clasped her narrow white hands together and lightly rested her chin on them. Geralt didn't interrupt, nor did he comment. Kings, continued Calanthe, divide people into two categories, those they order around and those they buy, because they adhere to the old and banal truth that everyone can be bought. Everyone. It's only a question of price. Don't you agree? Ah, I don't need to ask. You're a witcher after all. You do your job and take the money. As far as you're concerned, the idea of being bought has lost its scornful undertone. The question of your price, too, is clear, related as it is to the difficulty of the task and how well you execute it. And your fame, Geralt. Old men at fairs and markets sing of the exploits of the white-haired witcher from Rivia. If even half of it is true, then I wager your services are not cheap. So it would be a waste of money to engage you in such a simple trite matters as palace intrigue or murder. Those can be dealt with by other, cheaper hands. Brack! Gar! Brack! roared Kudakak, suddenly to loud applause. Geralt didn't know which animal he was imitating, but he didn't want to meet anything like it. He turned his head and caught the Queen's venomously green glance. Drogadar, his lowered head and face concealed by his curtain of grey hair, quietly strummed his lute. Ah, Geralt, said Calanthe, with a gesture forbidding a servant from refilling her goblet. I speak and you remain silent. We're at a feast. We all want to enjoy ourselves. Amuse me. I'm starting to miss your pertinent remarks and perceptive comments. I'd also be pleased to hear a complaint or two, homage or assurance of your obedience, in whichever order you choose. Oh well, your Majesty, said the Witcher, I'm not a very interesting dinner companion. I'm amazed to be singled out for the honour of occupying this place. Indeed, someone far more appropriate should have been seated here. Anyone you wished. Would have sufficed for you to give them the order, or to buy them. It's only a question of price. Go on, go on. Calanthe tilted her back and closed her eyes, the semblance of a pleasant smile on her lips. So I'm honoured and proud to be sitting by Queen Calanthe of Cintra, whose beauty is surpassed only by her wisdom. I also regard it as a great honour that the Queen has heard of me, and that on the basis of what she has heard, does not wish to use me for trivial matters. Last winter, Prince Hoback, not being so gracious, tried to hire me to find a beauty who, sick of his vulgar advances, had fled the ball. Losing a slipper, it was difficult to convince him that he needed a huntsman and not a witcher. The Queen was listening with an enigmatic smile. Other rulers, too, unequal to you in wisdom, didn't refrain from proposing trivial tasks. It was usually a question of the murder of a stepson, stepfather, stepmother, uncle, aunt. It's hard to mention them all. They were all of the opinion that it was simply a question of price. And that is where I'm going to leave it for this week. So I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I will see you next Monday for more of